So today we're going to be talking about plant reproduction, especially when it comes to flowers. Okay, so let's go through our different types of plant divisions that we've studied so far. Okay, when it comes to plant reproduction, the majority of plant reproduction that we'll be studying is sexual reproduction, which means we're going to have two different haploid cells coming together to make a new diploid cell for the new organism. Now there's also asexual reproduction, where we have one cell splitting off and making an exact copy of itself to go produce another new organism. Now this happens in plants quite a bit. We have lots of different mechanisms of asexual reproduction with plants. There's things like stolons, where a special branch branches off and starts a new organism. There's things like tubers or special roots. We can also do artificial asexual reproduction, using grafting or other special techniques that lots of agricultural scientists and farmers have used for many, many years. But we're going to focus mostly on sexual reproduction today. So let's take a look first at our bryophytes, our mosses. How do they reproduce? Okay, so for bryophyte reproduction, or our mosses in our liverworts, we have something special called a sporophyte that will pop up out of the adult plant, or the gametophyte down here. You can see the green part is the gametophyte. The sporophyte is what is going to contain the spores for reproduction, and it's a kind of complicated life cycle, but you just have to remember sporophyte and spores for our mosses. Our ferns, as we've already learned, have our sori on the underside of the fern leaves. Now these are also going to contain spores, which are how ferns reproduce as well, and so these little bumps will be in different patterns depending on the species and contain all the spores. Now, for conifers, we actually have pollen, so the situation is a little bit different, and we're going to have male and female cones. Now, the male cones are going to contain the pollen, and the female cones will contain the seeds, so that when the pollen blows by, they can receive the pollen inside. And when the female cones catch the pollen from the males, they can be fertilized and create the zygote. Let's talk about flowers, or the sexual reproduction for flowering plants. Now, what exactly is a flower? Well, our flower is just going to be the reproductive organ of angiosperms. So our flowering plants, this is the part that we need for reproduction. Now, flowers are both going to carry seeds and create pollen, and our seeds are going to be the developing embryos, or the developing baby plants. And once they're fertilized, they can continue to grow and create new plants. So our petals often have colorful parts to attract pollinators in order to disperse the pollen on different plants. When we have cross-pollination, that means more genetic diversity from one organism to the next and in the next generation. Okay, so let's talk about the structure of the flower. Alright, now let's take a look at the basic structure of the flower. Now I want you to follow along in your notes and label these parts as we go through them. So the first part that we're going to talk about is the female part of the flower, which we call the pistil. So the pistil includes the stigma up here, the style, this part right here, and the ovary, this part here. Now, the stigma is the part of the flower that's going to collect the pollen. The pollen will go down the style and into the ovary, where it will fertilize the ovules down here, which will then become the zygotes, or the plant embryos. So again, these parts are the stigma, the style, the long neck, and the ovary down here where the ovules are kept. And all these parts together are called the pistil, or the female parts of the flower. Now the male parts we call the stamen, and that is the anther and the filament. Now the filament is the stalk that the anther rests on, and the anther will have the pollen grains on the ends. So again, we have our anther and our filament down here, and these are the male parts of the flower, or the stamen. We also have some other accessory parts of the flower, accessory structures as they're sometimes called, and that includes the petals and the sepal. Now, these are neither male nor female, so they're not categorized as male or female, and they'll vary a lot depending on the type of flower. Some flowers have modified sepals or modified petals, so they look extremely different. But evolution and natural selection has led to our extreme diversity of flowers over many, many millions of years. So, another name for our petals, or all the petals together in a flower, is called the corolla. And another name for the sepal, or all the sepals in a flower, is called the calyx. So, corolla and calyx. We also have down here what we call the receptacle and the pedicle. These aren't super important to remember, so mostly focus on everything above there. Our sepal, our petals, our filament, our anther, our stigma, our style, our ovary, and our ovules. Think you got it? Alright, if that was too fast, go back and rewatch this video again and make sure you've correctly labeled all the parts on your flower drawing in your notes. Let's take a look at some real flowers, see these structures in real life. You'll get a chance to do this in class later on, but it's good to take a look here. So here, we can start at the bottom. This is a old rosebud that I've chopped up. These are sepals right here. Obviously, you know the petals. You can see them. And when you open up the rose, you can see inside we have lots and lots of stamen. So lots of anthers and filaments in the inside. On this type of flower, it's a little bit easier to see our reproductive structures. Now, I don't know if you guys can see, but here we have our stigma and our style going down, and here our anther with the pollen at the end and the filament here. And then if we open it all the way down, taking apart the petals, goodbye petals, goodbye. We look all the way down. Down here is going to be our ovary where the seeds will be, the ovules will be pollinated. Flowers, flowers!